I grew up in a white brick house on Maple Street in Boston, America, a house that always seemed to carry the warmth of my mother's presence. Its sea-green front door was chipped in places from years of use, and the wooden steps leading up to it had a soft groan that made sneaking in late at night nearly impossible. The garden had lilacs that climbed toward the windows, and every spring my mother would say they were proof that beauty could push its way out of even the coldest winters. For me, that house was more than just a building. It was the center of my childhood, the place where I felt most like myself. But on the day we buried my mother, that house stopped being my home. The funeral was quiet, held in a gray stone church near the Charles River, where the bells tolled too loudly for the number of mourners inside. My mother, Evelyn, was respected but private, and her circle was small. I sat in the front pew, numb, staring at the flowers laid across her casket. My father, Richard, sat stiffly beside me, his hands folded but his eyes cold. My brother, Caleb, leaned back with the restless air of someone who thought the whole thing a formality. As the priest spoke about eternal rest, I kept thinking how unreal it was. My mother, who had built companies from scratch, written letters in her looping script, and laughed with a sound that filled every corner of our house, was gone. After the burial, the mourners drifted away, and only the three of us returned to the house. I remember stepping onto the porch, the boards creaking under my weight, and feeling that strange heaviness in my chest that told me something was about to change. My father stood in the doorway, the late sun behind him casting his face into shadow, and he said words I will never forget. "Elizabeth, you need to leave. This house, this company, all of it belongs to me now." At first, I thought I had misheard him. My mother's empire, worth $10 billion, was hers alone. She had built it with grit and brilliance, and everyone knew it. My father had never been part of it. He had come from nothing, a man with no money and even less ambition, who had always lived in the shadow of her success. And yet, there he stood, declaring her fortune and her house his own. Caleb leaned against the porch rail, smirking at me as if enjoying some cruel joke. My father's eyes were flat and unyielding. "Go," he said, his voice sharper this time. "You don't belong here anymore." I had one small suitcase by my side, packed hastily with a few dresses, some books, and a box of photo albums I couldn't bear to leave behind. I could feel the wind off the Charles River pushing against me, cold and insistent. I looked at them both and forced the words out through clenched teeth. "You'll regret it." Caleb laughed first, a hollow, mocking sound, and then my father followed, his laughter harsher, edged with triumph. I didn't cry, not in front of them. I turned and walked down the steps, each creak echoing like a farewell. On the sidewalk, I stopped and pulled out the chain I had worn beneath my shirt for years. Hanging from it was a single key, thin and silver. It was not a key to the house. They had taken that from me long ago, but to a small steel box my mother had given me when I was 18. She had pressed into my hands and said, "Keep this close, just in case." I never asked her why. I simply carried it, like a quiet secret. Now, with the house behind me and my future suddenly blank, I knew the moment had come to use it. That night, I checked into a small hotel near Back Bay, the kind of place where no one asked questions if you paid in cash. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon polish. I set the steel box on the desk, my hands trembling as I slid the key into the lock. Inside was not jewelry, not bonds, not anything I expected. There was only one envelope, cream-colored, with my name written in my mother's handwriting. I opened it carefully, my breath catching as I unfolded the letter and the legal papers tucked inside. The letter was short. "Elizabeth," it read, "I know what your father is. I know what Caleb will become. Everything I built belongs to you. I've protected it, hidden it, and left it in your name alone. Trust Anna Price. She will guide you. Do not let them take what is yours. Love always, Mother." Beneath the letter was a signed will, notarized and complete, leaving every company, every property, every account to me. My name appeared again and again in her steady script. Not his. Not Caleb's. Mine. I read the pages once, then again, then a third time, as if the ink might vanish if I blinked. My hands shook as I set the papers down. My father had stood in the doorway and claimed it all, but he had been standing on a lie. I did not sleep that night. I made tea from the packet left on the dresser and sat on the stiff hotel bed with the papers spread around me. I thought of my mother's eyes, always sharp enough to see 3 steps ahead, and I realized she had outmaneuvered them even in death. She had trusted me with her life's work, and I had almost let it slip away. At dawn, I picked up the phone and dialed the number scrawled in the corner of the will. Anna Price, attorney at law, New York. My voice shook when she answered, but I forced myself to speak clearly. Anna, this is Elizabeth, I said. My mother's will. It names me. I have the papers. There was a pause, then Anna's calm, steady voice. Elizabeth, come now. Bring everything. We will take care of this. I hung up, repacked my suitcase, and placed the steel box back inside, holding it like a heartbeat. Outside, the city was waking, the early trains rumbling through Boston, the air sharp with morning chill. I walked to the station and bought a ticket for New York with the little cash I had left. As the train pulled out, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched the skyline of Boston shrink behind me. The house was gone, yes. My father's voice, Caleb's smirk, the sound of their laughter, they still rang in my ears. But I had my mother's words, her will, and her faith in me. And as the tracks carried me south, I began to understand that what I had lost was only walls and paint. What I carried with me was something greater, the truth that everything they had tried to steal was already mine, waiting for me to claim it. The train slid into Penn Station in the early morning, the underground platforms echoing with footsteps and the metallic shriek of brakes. I carried my single suitcase and the steel box as if they were shields. New York smelled like coffee, smoke, and ambition, and it struck me that this was the city my mother had always said could either eat you alive or make you stronger. I was not sure yet which side I would land on. But I had one name, one thread of certainty: Anna Price. Anna's office stood on Madison Avenue in a tall building of glass and steel. The doorman tipped his hat as if he already knew who I was, though that was impossible. Still, it gave me a strange confidence. I rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor, the box heavy in my arms, my reflection nervous in the mirrored walls. When the doors opened, I found a waiting room with quiet leather chairs and a receptionist who smiled politely. Miss Elizabeth? Miss Price is expecting you. Anna met me at the door of her office. She was tall, dressed in a navy suit that carried no nonsense, and her eyes were the sharp gray of a storm held at bay. She shook my hand firmly. Elizabeth, she said, your mother trusted me, and now I will do the same for you. Come sit. We have much to discuss. Her office was lined with books and certificates, a reminder that battles are often won not in the streets but on paper. I placed the steel box on the table and slid the will and the letter across to her. She read quickly, her expression calm but intent. When she finished, she looked up. Your mother was careful. She kept her holdings and trusts. The house title is separate. The operating company has a strong board. This document makes it clear. You are the sole heir. We will file the will today. Relief washed over me, though it was tangled with anger. I told Anna what had happened on the porch in Boston, my father's declaration, Caleb's smirk, the laughter that had chased me out. Anna listened without interruption, then said evenly, Your father has no legal claim. Your mother anticipated this. She knew who he was, and she made sure the law would be on your side. He may try to make noise, but we will answer with paper. She called in a man named Daniel, an accountant with quiet eyes and a habit of tapping his pen against his notebook. He laid out spreadsheets and reports that made my head spin. My mother's empire, as people called it, was larger than I had ever truly understood. There were shares in a clean energy firm in Chicago, already profitable and expanding into the Midwest. There was a chain of beloved bookstores stretching from New York to Los Angeles, each one a neighborhood landmark. There was a sizable stake in a media group in London, which explained the regular trips my mother had taken to Europe. And then there were the properties, 3 brownstones in Boston, including the white brick house on Maple Street. Daniel's voice was calm as he recited numbers, but each one felt like a weight pressed into my hands. At market close the day before, the total valuation stood at just over $10 billion. I gripped the arm of the chair. My father had mocked me as powerless, yet in reality, he had nothing. The fortune, the work, the legacy, it was all mine. I looked out the window at the skyline of New York, the towers glinting in morning light. I don't want to stay in Boston, I said finally. Every corner there reminds me of him. I want air and salt. I want to be somewhere that doesn't look like his face. The word slipped out before I could stop it. Him. My father had become not a man, but a shadow I needed to escape. You can leave, Anna said firmly. But first, we must make your position clear. If you walk away, without securing the ground beneath you, he will try to steal it again. So today we file. By noon, the board, the banks, and the registry will know. By evening, his access will be cut. And she was right. The hours blurred together in a flurry of signatures, seals, and couriers rushing documents across the city. I signed papers until my wrist ached, each stroke of ink closing a door my father had tried to force open. By noon, notices were served. By evening, Richard Price was locked out of accounts, companies, and deeds. The house on Maple Street was no longer his to stand in. That night, he called my phone once. The number glared on the screen like a wound I did not want to reopen. I let it ring. I let it fall silent. Then I blocked it. The next morning, Anna and I went over what could be sold without harming the workers who depended on my mother's vision. I agreed to sell a yacht my mother had once bought but rarely used. It brought in $4,200,000. A painting from the living room, one I never loved, went for $3,800,000. A spare condo near the river, purchased years ago as an investment, sold for $2,450,000. These sales gave me liquid funds without touching the heart of the empire. What I kept mattered more. The bookstores that had given people stories and shelter for decades, the clean energy firm that promised a brighter future, and the scholarships my mother had set up for students who couldn't afford to dream otherwise. From a London account, I added £5 million to those scholarships because my mother had always said education was the only true inheritance worth giving. For the first time in days, I felt my chest loosen. I was not just surviving, I was beginning to shape what was mine. Yet even in this moment of power, I knew I could not stay. The air in Boston was poison for me, thick with the memory of laughter at my expense. Within a week, I booked a one-way ticket to Hawaii. The idea of endless ocean, of mornings where the horizon was nothing but blue, felt like the breath I needed. Before I left, I sent Anna a short message. If they show up at the house, remind them the locks have changed. She replied with 2 words that steadied me. They will. As the plane ticket burned in my hand, I realized something strange. My father had tried to take everything from me, but in forcing me out, he had pushed me directly into the truth. My mother's empire was mine, my choices were mine, and my freedom was mine. When I stepped off the plane in Honolulu, the air itself felt different, as if I had landed in a world made of sunlight and salt water. The first breath I drew was heavy with hibiscus and ocean breeze, warm and alive in a way Boston never was. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel as if the ground were sliding out from under me. I had my suitcase, my mother's ring, and a notebook with the word list scrawled across its cover. That notebook became my anchor. The first evening, I checked into a rental house near the shore, small and pale yellow with shutters that rattled in the trade winds. It wasn't mine, but for $3,500 a month, it was safe and close to the water. The floorboards were uneven, and the furniture smelled faintly of salt, but when I opened the back door, I could hear the sea breathing against the sand. I sat on the porch, listening, and began to write my first list. Swim every morning. Call the managers in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Keep the scholarships alive. Do not search my father's name online. It seemed almost laughably simple, but after the chaos of court filings, lawyers, and sales, I needed something small, something human. The next morning, I bought a secondhand bike for $120 from a man who insisted it had seen more sunsets than you can count. I believed him. The paint was scratched, and the chain squeaked when I pedaled, but it carried me to the beach at dawn, where the sand was cool under my feet and the waves stretched endlessly ahead. That's where I met Mary. She was a surf instructor, her skin bronze from years in the sun, her hair tangled from salt and wind. She had a scar running along her knee, and when she saw me standing stiff at the shoreline, she grinned. "You look like you need to fall into a wave," she said. There was something so easy, so direct about her tone that I followed without hesitation. The first wave knocked me flat, and the second spun me into the sand like laundry. Salt water filled my nose and mouth, and I came up coughing, laughing in spite of myself. Mary clapped her hands. "Perfect," she called. Falling is half the work. By the time the sun rose fully, I was exhausted and grinning, salt drying on my face, my body aching in the best way. It felt like a reset, as if the ocean itself had scrubbed me clean of Boston. Afternoons were different. They were for work. I had promised Anna that I would not abandon what my mother built, and I meant it. From the little desk in my rental, with the shutters open to let in the breeze, I made calls. Karen in Chicago spoke with me about the solar projects. She was passionate, with a voice that sparked when she described installing panels on school rooftops. We decided to allocate $22 million to expand the program, funding panels and training so that students could not only learn under clean light, but also understand the science behind it. Then there was Ben in New York who managed the bookstores. His first words to me were cautious. He hadn't known what kind of heiress I might be. But when I told him, my mother believed money should move, not sit, something softened in his tone. We agreed to raise wages by $2 an hour across the board and add a $1,000 bonus for staff who had stayed through the last 5 years. Ben sounded almost disbelieving when he said, "You mean it?" I did. I wanted every paycheck to carry a piece of my mother's vision. Evenings were the hardest. That was when silence crept in, bringing with it the faces of my father and Caleb. I would sit with the box of photos I'd carried from Boston and let myself remember. Some nights I wrote letters I never intended to send. To my father, I wrote, "You were poor in money, yes, but that was never the problem. You were poor in kindness, and that is a debt you will never pay." To Caleb, I wrote, "There was always room for you. Always. But you laughed anyway." Folding the pages into the notebook, I felt lighter. The words didn't have to reach them. It was enough that they had left me. One evening, I sat on the beach with the photo box beside me. The waves glowed silver in the moonlight, and I sifted through the pictures until one slipped free, a photo of my mother in London. She was standing outside a bookshop, holding a paper bag full of novels, laughing at a street musician who was mid-song. On the back, in her unmistakable handwriting, she had written, "Make the world bigger for someone. Every day." I underlined the sentence twice and placed the photo on my nightstand. That night, I dreamed of bookstores buzzing with voices, classrooms lit by solar lamps, and students opening acceptance letters that would change their lives. My mother's voice whispered through it all, steady and warm. Hawaii became more than an escape. It became a classroom for me. Each morning wave reminded me that balance requires falling first. Each conversation with Karen or Ben showed me that leadership wasn't about control, it was about trust. And each quiet evening with my notebook proved that anger could be turned into motion, regret into purpose. Of course, the shadows of Boston still reached me sometimes. I caught myself glancing at the newsstand near the market, wondering if my father's name would appear in some lawsuit or scandal. But I resisted looking. I told myself that my story was no longer tied to his downfall. It was tied to what I could build, what I could give, what I could keep alive. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters and the sea roared outside, I realized something profound. Leaving Boston had not been a flight of weakness. It had been an act of strength. I had walked away from their laughter, carrying nothing but a suitcase, a ring, and a key. And with those small things, I had stepped into a future vast enough to hold oceans. I closed my notebook and wrote one last line under my list for the day. Do not look back unless it is to remember love. News has a way of traveling faster than waves, even across the wide Pacific. I thought I had escaped the reach of Boston by putting an ocean between myself and the house on Maple Street, but Anna was right. Men like my father and brother cannot sit quietly when they believe they've been cheated, even when the truth is that they tried to cheat first. One morning, while I was drinking coffee on the porch of my rented house, Anna forwarded me an email. The subject line was blunt: "Incident at the Boston property." My stomach tightened as I opened it. A neighbor had seen my father and Caleb try to force their way into the old house. The new locks held, and the notice of ownership, sealed and filed in court, was posted clearly on the front door in its plastic sleeve. Neighbors stood on the sidewalk watching, their whispers sharp in the cool air. My father had shouted. Caleb had shifted his weight, staring at the ground, his smirk gone. For a long while, I stared at the screen, imagining the scene. The house that had been filled with my mother's laughter now held only their frustration. The thought didn't bring me joy, only a strange heaviness, as though I were watching strangers fight over a ghost. A week later, Anna called me directly. "They've hired a lawyer," she said. Her voice was calm, as if she'd expected this all along. "But there's nothing there for them to win. The will is ironclad. Your mother left them no opening. Let them read it and learn," I told her. "I'm done reading their faces." That night, I walked down to the beach. The moon was swollen and pale, casting a silver road across the water. I sat in the sand, let the waves lap against my ankles, and spoke aloud as if my mother were beside me. I kept the parts that mattered. I whispered. The people, the work, the promise. Saying it out loud was like laying a stone on a grave, not for her, but for the life I had lost when my father laughed at me on the porch. I decided then that I would never return to live in the Boston house. It was too heavy with betrayal, too soaked in the sound of their laughter. Houses are wood and paint. They can be stolen, lost, or rebuilt. Home is something else. Home is a choice you make every day, and I was ready to make mine far from the shadows of Maple Street. Mary helped me look for a place of my own. We rode her truck along the coast, stopping at small houses tucked behind palms or perched on cliffs with sweeping views. A week later, we found it. A little blue house with peeling shutters, a tilted mailbox, and a mango tree leaning toward the yard like it wanted to shelter whoever lived there. It wasn't grand. It wasn't polished. But it felt honest. I paid $750,000 in cash and signed the deed with a hand that did not shake. When the realtor passed me the keys, I felt something settle in me, a quiet, steady joy. This was not a house I had inherited through grief or fought for in court. It was mine because I chose it. The first thing I did after moving in was call Anna. "I want to set up something permanent," I told her. "Not for me, for others." Together, we created a trust that sent $250,000 each month to fund free reading rooms in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and London. I wanted children, students, even lonely strangers to walk into a room, take a book from a shelf, and feel the world stretch larger around them. We also established quarterly funding, $500,000 every 3 months, for the solar project in schools. It was a way to tie my mother's love for education and her belief in clean futures into something that breathed and grew. When Anna asked me what salary I wanted for myself, I thought carefully. I could have taken millions, but I settled on $180,000 a year, enough to live comfortably without excess, enough to keep me grounded. The rest, I told her, should keep moving, like water, like wind, like the laughter my mother left behind. Some evenings, I stood in the kitchen of my blue house as the trade winds tugged at the curtains and thought about the phrase I had heard too many times, "Revenge is sweet." Maybe for some it is. But what I felt was not sweetness, it was relief. It was a door closing behind me, leaving me free to walk forward. It was a promise kept. If my father ever reaches the day when he admits regret, and I suspect he will, it won't change what happened. He will regret the porch, the sneer, the laugh. He will regret the moment he chose greed over love, power over family. But those regrets are his to carry, not mine. I imagine him sometimes, sitting alone in the Boston house he thought was his, realizing the locks no longer open for him. I imagine Caleb standing beside him, quieter now, wondering what might have been if he had chosen loyalty over mockery. I don't hate them anymore. Hatred is a rope that ties you to the past, and I've cut that rope. Here in Hawaii, my mornings are made of salt and light. I make lists in my notebook. Swim, plant mango seedlings, call Karen about the solar panels, check on Ben and the bookstores, write letters to scholarship recipients. Sometimes I sign notes by hand and slip them into the envelopes. You belong in this world. Study hard. Dream bigger than you think you should. When I imagine those envelopes opening in dorm rooms or kitchen tables across America and Europe, I feel my mother smiling. One morning, Mary and I sat on the porch, sipping coffee while the sun climbed over the horizon. She looked at me, her smile gentle, and said, "You look like someone who finally arrived." And she was right. This is my story. I left, yes. I also arrived. And in America, on this bright edge of the ocean, I learned the most useful lesson my mother ever tried to teach me. Money is a tool, a house is a shelter, and a name is a promise you keep.